You're listening to STEMxm, where women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics share their stories of success, overcoming barriers, and breaking the glass ceiling. And now, your host, Mel the Engineer.
Hello, and welcome to STEMxm, where we explore the many career paths in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I am Mel the Engineer, and I'm so glad you joined me today. I've got an inspiring guest. Her name is Kayla Carter, and she is a biomedical engineer. Kayla earned a degree in biomedical engineering from Syracuse University and later a Master of Science in Healthcare Technology Management from Marquette University. Kayla has experience working for Beckman Coulter and Battelle. She's now working on a PhD at Purdue and running her own consulting business. She's a great inspiration and has a lot of great advice to share on biomedical engineering and related fields. So I want to apologize quickly. I had some issues with sound with this recording, so this episode may be quieter than some of the other episodes of the STEMxm podcast. But I also want to ensure you I've been working to correct these issues for future episodes, so thank you for your patience. Okay, let's get right into our chat with Kayla, and I'll join you back at the end of the episode to discuss show notes and any other resources. Here we go. Hello, Kayla Carter. Thank you so much for joining us today on STEMxm. Welcome.
Thank you for having me today. This is going to be a great experience to talk about what I've been doing over the last years, and I'd love to share with the community.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about your background. Where are you from?
I am originally from Columbus, Ohio. I lived in Ohio until I was in high school, and then I moved to Racine, Wisconsin. From there, I ended up going to Syracuse University in New York. And while I was in New York, that's where I started my pathway into engineering as a biomedical engineer.
All right. So tell us more about that. Talk to us about like your last years of high school and your first couple of years of college. Why did you end up at Syracuse, and how did you decide to study biomedical engineering?
So I actually grew up in an engineering family. My father is an industrial engineer. My uncle is also an industrial engineer. I have an aunt that's a chemical. So engineering has kind of been a part of my life, just being exposed to it by family members. So for me, throughout high school, I was an athlete. I ran track. I had a lot of track offers for college. So I had always been looking at what was the best fit to be an athlete and be an engineer. So when I went on recruiting visits, a lot of questions that I ended up asking was, can I do both? Because engineering is a very challenging course curriculum in college, and so is the commitment to be a full-time Division I athlete. There were schools that said no. There were schools that just said that we have never supported that and we don't know how to support that. And Syracuse in that process was a school that not only had my major, but was willing to support the whole person that I am. And they were willing to support my academic goals as well as my athletic goals in that process. So that is what became the best fit for me. I was in a fortunate situation in high school. We had a program where we were able, our junior and senior year, to spend a week in a career that we thought we wanted to pursue following high school. And that's actually how I got exposed to biomedical engineering. I ended up traveling to Marquette University and shadowing some grad students there, and they were working with children who had cerebral palsies and helping make new walkers for them. And it really intrigued my interest. So that was really what prompted me to say, yeah, I wanted to be a biomedical engineer because I really want to help, this population, especially kids who may have disabilities and can't be kids and can't just have fun with their friends like most other kids. So that's really what drew me to looking at majors in biomedical engineering. And then from there, it became a choice of what was the best balance between athletics and the engineering program.
Right. That's awesome. So was there anything about going through the biomedical engineering program that surprised you that you had to cover in your curriculum?
I would say for me, the piece that was most surprising was that out, I mean, you learn a lot through your core course curriculum, but when I came in, I was really challenged by some seniors that had already been to the program to like get out and do internships during the year or research assignments during the year. And for me, that was the part that I would have missed. I would have just went through my standard core curriculum, and then I would have missed the opportunity to like experiment with different parts of biomedical engineering. So biomedical engineering is a vast array of things, and it ranges from doing research in a lab all the way to working in industry. And if I wouldn't have done things outside of the class, like getting with professors and trying to sit in their lab, I wouldn't have been able to know what parts of it I like and what parts I didn't like. So I did some rotations in laboratories where I got to work with cadavers, um, which was a challenge for me. Because it also taught me that that was what I didn't want to work in that space. But I also got to do some other things where I got to work with, hands on with people, and that was more of a space that I liked to be in. So I would say the part that isn't written in the core book of how to graduate was being able to get outside the classroom and connect with people to try out their different research to see what you really like and what you're really passionate about.
Yeah, I think that's really great, and it's you're right. There's so many different, uh, specific areas that you could go into in this field. So I'd love it if you would talk a little bit more about that, if you could. Because I suspect that there's both a mechanical route and then there's, almost an electrical engineering route where you're dealing with, electronics that could actually be embedded in the body or the software that has to control those devices. Could you talk to us more about these fields and how a student interested in biomedical engineering might decide where to go?
Absolutely. So, biomedical engineering is a huge continuum. It's basically become the hybrid of multiple engineering facets. So, as I went through my undergrad program, I took classes in electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, as well as classes that were focused primarily on like the human body and anatomy. As with the school that I went to, we had basically three main tracks. We had biomedical engineering with an electrical focus. We had one with a mechanical focus, and then we had an up and coming track, which was like informatics. And in the biomedical informatics program, they do more of data analysis of human information. So, like when we go to the doctor and the doctor um, ask us all of our patient history, and we start to create this log every doctor's visit of our personal history. They take that information and are able to determine trends within the community or trends within a certain population. And that was kind of just coming about, but it's now become even bigger with, the invention of wearable devices and hands-on technology on your iPhone to tell you your heart rate. So that's really a space that's really evolved. I would say for me, the best way to try to because I had no idea. I just knew I wanted to be a biomedical engineer. I didn't know which track I wanted to go. And I'm very hands-on. So if I can touch it and I can feel it, I can determine if I like it. And so that's like the best advice I can give a student is like don't go in thinking necessarily have to know all the answers, and just start to find people in the spaces that you think you're interested in and start asking them questions. And that could be a mentor, that could be just to sit down and let's have coffee. I have questions about your career and what you do. Or it could be a more structured route of like an outside research credit. And those are not huge projects, but they're projects enough that would get you through the semester and have a good feel of what that person does in their line of work. For one example was I did a research project with a group that worked on new prosthetics for your shoulder. So if you tear your rotator cuff, there's a prosthetic they can put into your shoulder to replace the worn materials. And when I did that, I worked with mice, I worked with cadaver bones, I was in the lab 24/7. And I didn't really like being in the lab that much. Like I wanted to be able to talk to people and get out. So it really told me after I did that, there was a lot of things in the experience I really did like I really liked medical devices. So I would say you do those things and then you reflect and you say, what about those things that I really like? And what about those things didn't fit so well?
This is your host, Mel. We had a slight connectivity issue here, so I asked Kayla to kind of go back over what she said when it was a little bit jumbled. So we're going to pick right back up with where she's describing this piece again.
So for me, the best way that I felt like figuring out if I was going to be electrical, mechanical, or informatics was to just try them, to go out and find people that I could either talk to or sit in their lab and shadow them, to try them. So my very first one was with medical devices for the shoulder. And I spent a lot of time in the lab kind of by myself on that rotation. I didn't really like being by myself and I didn't really like being in the lab, but I really liked the medical device design. So when I chose my next research project, I ended up going into a human performance lab where I was dealing with patients and they were coming in and out of the lab and still using medical devices. And I like that better because of the human interaction. So I would say the best way to figure out what pathway to go is you have to get out and you have to try it and kind of spend a day in the life. And then you'll determine I either like some things about it and I don't like some other things. And then you can try something different.
So, did you have to seek internships on your own for this, or were there like research things that the school had going on that you could get involved with, or some combination of both?
So there was a combination of both. So I was most universities have a hospital on site. A lot of universities have other types of research labs connected with the hospital, especially universities that have doctoral programs. So I was fortunate. Syracuse sat on campus right next door to Upstate Medical College, which produces doctors. So I actually ended up reaching out to a lot of people in that lab via email and just said, hey, I'm an undergrad. This is what I'm looking at. I think your lab would be cool. Can I come visit? Most people are very receptive to that and they'll let you in their lab. They'll show you the ropes. And then from there, if I liked the lab, I would be like, is there anything I can help with during the semester? Now, granted, they're not paid when you go that route, but you can get credit for classes. So I ended up using mine as credits. During the summer, I did the opposite route. Our school had an advisor, like most schools, that will help you get internships. So during the summer, I actually did paid internships with companies through that route. So there was probably a balance of the two. I know people who did paid internships during the summer, or during the school year. My schedule didn't allow for that, being a full-time athlete. But that is definitely an option, and it would just be about talking with your advisor at the college or your dean within your college to say what options are there and what have other people done.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. You took a lot of initiative there and you took advantage of what the school had to offer. So that's really great. Um, okay, so while you were in school, were you involved with any particular professional organizations, and how did that involvement help you either academically or in your career?
So while I was in school, I was involved with the National Society of Black Engineers. I wish I was more, looking at it now, I wish I was more involved with them when I was in school. Um, Being an athlete, a Division I NCAA athlete, there was just not a lot of time for that. So I was a member. I stayed involved in general body meetings, but I didn't hold an office. And what that allowed for me to do was connect with people that were my peers in my classroom. So if I was traveling for a track meet, someone else would take my notes. And usually it came out of that professional society because of relationships I had built. Um, it also allowed for when career services came in or people came in looking for internships that you kind of had like the first shot at getting in front of these individuals for summer internships. So I would say if you have the time to get involved with professional societies, do it. It's such a great experience. As I got into my career, I became more involved in these societies, and they've become some of my greatest mentors and helped me navigate my early career as I've started out. So if you can do it, do what you are capable of doing. Don't overwhelm yourself by trying to get involved in everything, but definitely getting involved in one or two and trying to stay connected through that through your early career will be a tremendous help.
Awesome. That's great. Did you go directly from working on your bachelor's to your master's?
So I did. That was not really the plan, but I did do that. I ended up, I was one of the few people when I graduated, which was in the heart of the 2009 decline of jobs, that had a job when I left school. I ended up not pursuing that job because it really wasn't in exactly what I wanted to be doing, but it was like, hey, nobody has a job and I have one, so I'm going to take it. At that time, I also was applying to grad school, so the grad school route for me worked out better. And while I was in my first semester of grad school, I was still applying for jobs. So I actually started working my first medical device company the summer after my first year. So I finished my grad program and worked full time at that point. But I also was in a better fit of a program as far as my career than I would have been if I would have went to the initial job that I had.
Okay, talk to us about how you made the decision for grad school in terms of where to go and your research.
Sure. So grad school is that decision making process is very different than undergrad. It's very much about who is doing research that you want to be either involved with or connected to. So I would say if you're looking at grad programs or you're ever thinking about grad school, you really want to start your research early about what the professors in the program that you're looking at are doing. You also want to look at what type of outputs are they having? So what research outputs are being talked about across the community that you're going to be involved in? My choice for grad school was mostly made on the fact that I knew I liked medical product design development, and so Marquette had a program that combined how to do that. It was a management degree in healthcare technology, and it really was about how do you manage the process of design and development for medical devices or the acquisition of medical products. So that was a choice for me based on that was where I wanted my career to focus, and it fit at the time. It aligned perfectly with the career that I was in. So yeah, I think pieces of it may be if you're working, it may be what aligns with the career to help me advance my career. But other pieces is really going to be about how do I want to connect as an expert in the field that I'm getting my master's or graduate degree in.
That's awesome. That program sounds pretty amazing. It sounds like a meshing of both the medical and industrial engineering, along with the business aspects of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So the healthcare technology management program was actually a combination project program with three departments at Marquette. So it included the business administration department, the biomedical engineering department, and it included the medical college of Wisconsin. And so each of them had a very unique role in this process. The business administration group, we did a lot of classes with MBA students, and we talked about the accounting pieces of it or your return on investments of acquisitions. Versus when we went over to the Medical College of Wisconsin, we talked a lot about how to run clinical trials, how to get approval through the regulatory bodies for medical devices because it's a regulated industry versus being in the engineering side, you talked a lot about how do you just design it. So it was a really good fit for me being in medical products to be able to see all sides of the puzzles because when you work in industry, you're managing projects that need all three of those pieces.
That's a really good way of explaining it. So I have a question about your decision process going back for graduate school. Do you think if you had come out with your bachelor's at a time when the economy was strong and you had a job in the field that you wanted, do you think you would have waited to go back waited to go back for a master's degree?
I would have. I would say it would probably look similar to what I'm doing now. So even though I finished my master's degree while working, following that, I took 5 years between that and now going back and getting my PhD. And part of that was because I really wanted the work experience. A lot of time with the aspiration of maybe becoming a dean of a college of engineering or a professor, I wanted to be able to tell 90% of your students go into industry. They're not necessarily going into academia. So I wanted to be able to share those experiences of being in industry and being able to manage corporate America and client requests and all of those. So for me, I would have waited just so that I could have gained that experiences. But I also have friends that have done it the opposite and have been very successful in the back end. So there's no right answer. It's about personal fit. And what are your personal aspirations and what skill sets do you think you need to accomplish those?
Absolutely. Have you heard of any positions or companies in the biomedical engineering field that pay to send engineers back for graduate work?
Absolutely. My graduate work, my second year, was fully paid for. My company paid for it. Most companies, as a benefit to their full time employees, have some type of continuing education program. That if that is an aspiration, that's a great question to ask on an interview, because you wanted to make it known to that employer prior to them hiring you that that's where your goals are, and you want to know if maybe they can help subsidize the cost of that. The program that in or the last two employers I've had, both they have caps for the year usually, somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000. Because grad programs don't have as many credits, that usually gets you through your grad program successfully, but it may take you a little bit longer because you're going part time if you really don't want to pay anything out of pocket. The other requirement that I've seen at companies is that you have to get a B or better to get reimbursed for that cost. So you may have to come out of pocket for that cost up front. But as long as you got a B or better, you turn in your transcript and then they give you your money back. The reverse side of that has been that the program should probably align, or you need to think about how to sell it to your manager that it aligns with what you're currently working on. Companies provide this benefit because they want your expertise. They want to be able to say, we have people that work here with XYZ expertise. So you want to really package it to your manager that it's not only going to be a value add for you, but a value add for them.
That's a really important point. I'm glad you brought it up. So, yeah, for our listeners, when you want to get something from your employer, there's often a way to do it if you can show that, going back for a certain class or certification or training will also benefit the company. So sometimes companies will have an arrangement with you where, okay, we'll pay for your school if you stay with us for the next however many years, kind of thing. So yeah, that's a really great point you brought up there.
And that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, Melissa. It's because you're right. Both of the companies that I was in had a requirement. Once you've gotten your degree, you need to stay at least 12 to 24 months. And that varies by companies. But again, it's because they want some value out of the money that they just invested in you.
Absolutely, and that makes sense, and it's fair.
Yeah.
Um, so let's kind of go back. And you worked for Beckman Coulter while you were doing graduate work, and then you worked for them several years after that. Talk to us about that company. What does the company do, and what did you do there for them?
Absolutely. So Beckman Coulter has recently been purchased by Danaher Corporation. They still carry their Beckman Coulter name. At the time that I got into Beckman Coulter, they had a innovation fellowship program, and that program was designed to bring in new graduates. So either graduate from undergrad or a graduate from a graduate studies program, to initiate them into the organization. So for a year, I got to travel with this company who paid for everything, and as a full-time employee, and I traveled to their different locations and learned different skills across the board. So Beckman is primarily in what they call in vitro diagnostic devices. So if you go to the doctor and they draw your blood, they send it to the lab, and when they send it to the lab, they run it on large scale equipment. This equipment can run hundreds of thousands of tests a minute, and it can run tests from typical white blood cell count all the way up to, do you have an autoimmune deficiency? So that's pretty much Beckman Coulter's bread and butter, is they create this total laboratory automation devices to help major hospitals and hospital networks get a lot of tests done for not a lot of money, which also helps reduce our overall healthcare cost. So when I started with them, I started actually out in Brea, California, which is in Orange County, and that's where their headquarters was located at the time. And I started as actually in sales. I would travel to hospitals who did not have laboratory automation and talk with them about how laboratory automation would help them. Obviously, we would still talk about the cost because the hope was that they were going to buy our equipment, but it taught me a lot about the business as a whole. With me being a new person to the business, it taught me about the product line, it taught me about the clients, and why what the business was doing was really, really important. I was in Brea for 3 months, and then my next rotation was in Indianapolis, and there I worked on actually designing the next generation of total lab automation. So I tried to connect my rotations on what I learned previously to how I can bring that back to the design team, because I've always wanted to be in design. So I worked there for 3 months, and then I went to Miami and worked in hematology, which does blood counts around your cell count. So mostly white blood cells, red blood cells, are they high or are they low? And that again was to put on this next generation of total lab automation. And basically total lab automation takes every instrument that does some type of blood test in your laboratory and connects it via a conveyor belt and barcode readers, so that when the person in the lab gets your blood sample, they don't have to touch it until the results are out, and it can run a million tests or two, run out of blood, um, before they would need to intervene with it. And really what that does is it helps reduce like errors within the hospital network, and it helps reduce patient errors. So that's and then I left there, and I went to Miami, and then I came back to Indianapolis, which is where I ended up staying. So my role at Beckman Coulter was what they call a systems engineer. And usually you hear this term in the IT network space. But systems engineering and medical product design is a fairly new term. A lot of people are taking it on, and that is really the central person that helps pull together the electrical engineers and the mechanical engineers and your software engineers to one central idea. So for me as a systems engineer, I was responsible for the big picture. So in 12 months, we want a device that can run 1,200 blood tests in an hour. That was the big picture that I owned. And each individual group, electrical, mechanical, and software, would go off and work on their own individual pieces. And then I was responsible for integrating them. Because sometimes when you work in silos, you don't always have a design that fits with the next person. So I was you can say I was kind of like the intermediary, or the kind of the traffic command of, hey, this person over here is doing this, so you need to do something different because what you're doing right now isn't going to line up when we put this whole thing together.
Right, and that's really cool. So that takes an ability to see the big picture and focus on where you want to get and get everybody on board to do it. So that's very cool. I have a question about these rotations you were describing. Were you did you come into Beckman Coulter like into a special program where they had people rotating around at different locations for different positions?
Yes, so I came into a program um, at the time was called the Innovation Fellowship Program. I know when I was leaving, Danaher Corporation was keeping a very similar program. So the program still exists. It may exist in a slightly different fashion than when I first started in it. But basically, they hired you in, you were a full time employee on day one. So you still got your salary. But then they rotated you through the company to help expedite your ability to gain experience about the company's products and their teams because they had organizations from Indianapolis to Miami to Munich, Germany. So this was like their fast track. Their hope of this group was that they became the future leaders of the company. And during that time, they paid for you to travel to all of these places. They also paid for your housing and a rental car. So you really didn't have any expenses out of your own pocket to make this happen other than the commitment to be able to live somewhere else every 3 months and like your daily food or fun activities. So it was great. I mean, for me being at the time of me coming out, I was single, I didn't have any kids, and it was like, why not? Why not jet set across the world for a year and get paid to do it? So definitely, I know, like I said, I know Danaher still has their a rotational style program, but other companies do it. I believe this type of program started at actually Dow AgroScience. So there are CEOs that are invested in programs like this. So if you think that's something of interest, I would just seek them out. I found it on Google. I just Googled rotational programs one night as I was looking for a job and it came up. But if you're looking at a specific company and you look in their career site, you might see something similar.
Yeah, I've heard about other programs in different fields. Obviously, you're the first biomedical person I've had on the show, so that's great. It's great to hear that those opportunities are available. So going forward from there, you went from Beckman Coulter to Battelle. So could you talk to us about that decision and what is Battelle and what did you do there? And that's Battelle with a B. The first time I heard someone say this, I thought they were saying Patel, and I had no idea what they were talking about.
Yeah, so um, in the new workforce, which was very different than the workforce of, my parents and my grandparents, really most, and this isn't a hard rule or fast rule of thumb, but most people transition probably every 3 to 5 years. And really your transition to, and by transition, it could be within your own organization, it could be a new role, or it could be outside your organization that you were at for a role. Um, at the time, about my 5 year mark at back, or I would say I probably started at year 2.5. Year 2.5, I started thinking about what's next. I had a great manager at Beckman Coulter who helped me navigate into a leadership role within the systems engineering group, and he helped put me on projects to gain those skill sets to do that. So really, when I started to think about am I staying or am I going, was a very tough decision for me because I just had a phenomenal manager that was guiding me through this process. That probably would have took me twice as long as it took me to get the same skill set. The thing for me that was really the driving force of change was this was my first job. And it wasn't there wasn't anything bad about it. It was just like I didn't know what else was out there. I'm very like experience things, so you know what you like and you don't like. And so for me, this was one of those times where I had an opportunity that actually came to me about from LinkedIn. So I'm going to talk about LinkedIn in a second. Um, to go to Battelle, and I was just like, wow, it was my first job, and Battelle is in Columbus, Ohio, which is my home. Why not? So there was some people leave because they're disgruntled about what they're doing or they're not advancing the way that they should. And my situation was not that. I was advancing. I was getting promotions. I was moving into more challenging work. It was more so about the fact that I needed to understand what a different organization did. And again, these were all to get to my long-term goal of I knew I was going back to get my PhD at some point because I want to be the dean of a college. And I wanted these experiences to say, okay, I know what it feels like for you to transition jobs. I know what it feels like for you to work in two very different organizations. So that was what I was building to when I made the decision to change. So about LinkedIn, I was not looking for a job when I got a job. I will say it is always easier to find a job when you have one than when you don't. I actually was found by a recruiter on LinkedIn. So if you don't think LinkedIn is important and you don't think it's important to keep your LinkedIn profile up to date, it is because people contact you and say, hey, I want you to work for my company. So the recruiter that actually contacted me, and usually the recruiters will send you an email and they say, hey, are you interested? And there's tons of recruiters that I've told, no, I'm not interested right now, but please keep me updated on future things, or I've passed them along to friends. This particular one was a good next step for me. It actually had, a lead systems engineering in the title and the role description. And so that would be what would be my next step in my career. So I talked to her, and there is no harm in talking to recruiters while you're still working for somebody else because you can always tell them no, but don't limit your options just because you're comfortable where you're at. So I always say keep the door open and then you make the decision to close that door. But again, I can't preach long and hard enough about how important it is to keep your social media, especially LinkedIn, up to date. Recruiters are on it all the time trying to find information. And that is actually how I ended up at Battelle. So, Battelle Memorial Institute is actually a nonprofit. So Beckman Coulter is a for-profit company and Battelle is a nonprofit. They are a very large nonprofit, approximately $6 billion in revenue. They do a lot of things. Battelle is probably most known for their government contracts. They have a whole division in national security. They also have a division in health sciences and health analytics. The division I worked in was obviously their medical products group, which is probably one of their smaller divisions. And then they have a huge philanthropy within engineering education. And Battelle was formed out of a trust. And the trust basically said that they needed to give back a certain percentage of their money to not other nonprofit organizations. Most of their money goes to STEM organizations, but they have they have this awesome benefit for employers. Like if I contributed $100 to my favorite nonprofit, they match it 100%. So there is a huge push within Battelle to give back, educate the future generation, make sure that they're leaving something behind within the community in Columbus.
Now they have a wider reach than that than just in Ohio, right? Like they do stuff all over the country. Is my
Yes.
impression.
So Battelle works all across the country and all across the globe, actually. They are more of a contract to hire design and development group. They do a lot of work with like NHI, which is the National Healthcare Institute for laboratories. Their medical products group in particular, since that's what I was most familiar with, we had clients from all over the world. And usually, how that worked was Battelle is known for having experts in fields, be it chemistry, analytics, medical products, material science. They're just known for being experts. And part of that's come from winning tons and tons of government contracts over the years. So a client usually comes across a project or a problem within their project that they can't quite solve or they don't have the resources to solve, and they hired Battelle to help. So we get people from all over the world, and very few of those individuals are actually directly in Columbus, Ohio.
Can you talk to us about a specific project that you worked on there?
Sure. I've worked on a lot of projects since I was there. I worked on an up and coming like combination device, which would be with a pharmaceutical company. I was, which does some combination of device and drug delivery. I would say probably the one that is probably most recognizable to people that I have worked on is Battelle is currently working on a project called Neuralife, and it has been on CNN and MSNBC and some of the Science Fire. But basically, this device is a neural stimulation device that a, an implant is implanted in a person who is paraplegic, so they don't have function of their arms, or they don't have major function of their arms and legs due to paralysis. The individual that has been featured on a lot of our news media has been due to an accident, but they implant this brain implant where they're able to send um, stimulation through electrodes to help them regain some mobility in their upper extremities. So the young man that they're currently working with, he is able to now open and close his hands. He can pick up a cup and move it from point A to point B. He can play some DJ Hero. So there's some really cool videos out there. On the internet and on YouTube, taping some of their sessions with him. But I would say for me, that's probably been the most rewarding project I've been on because, again, it was a project that had a lot of human contact versus client human by end user human versus like client contact.
Wow, that's really amazing. That definitely sounds like it would be extremely rewarding. And I will find some either articles, videos, or both to put in the show notes. So we'll link to that for our listeners to learn some more about it. That's great. Okay, so we're coming up a little bit close on our time. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk um, in terms of some general career items. So, you're the first biomedical engineer that I've had on the show, as well as the first African American I've had on the show. And I'd like to open it up for you to discuss with us. Have there been any times, either in school or in your career, that you've experienced sexism or racism, and how did you handle those situations?
Sure. I would say there's times that exist in both. Some are more blatant than others. I would say for me, I one incident that kind of sticks out in my mind was during high school. Again, being more hands-on and science focused, I really thought I was a really bad writer. Like I was just convinced that I could not write anything to save my life. And I had a teacher that told me I was a really bad writer. So I would go in every morning with this teacher, and um, we would sit, and I would rewrite papers and rewrite papers and rewrite papers. And no matter how much time I spent with this teacher, she would give me a C. And I'm just like, I can't like sit with you for like 20 hours this week and still get a C. Like, what is going on? So I would try it again, and I'd sit and I sit and I sit, and she'd give me a C. And so about once, I think probably my third week of doing this, she finally looked at me and she just said, there's just no hope for you because Black people can't write. And I
Oh,
went home crying.
wow.
Like, I was in tears. Like, I'm like, I'm 14, 15 in high school, and I'm like, whoa, I've never heard that before. So I went home crying. And my mother said to me, some people are didn't have the exposure that others have been warranted. Sometimes when you're not exposed to people of any race or color being highly intelligent or very capable of doing things, then you have a very close perspective about that. And actually, I was like, I don't want to meet with her anymore. I'll just take my C. Like, and my mother was like, no, you're going to go and you're going to sit with her and you're going to make her teach you how to write, right? And I'm just like, my mom is crazy. At the time, I was so upset. I'm like, like any 15-year-old, I don't want to do that. And I'm in a big fight with my mom because I just thought she was crazy. But looking at it now, what she was saying was correct. Because if I wasn't the person to expose to my teacher that I was capable and I would have just quit, she would have continued that thought process for any other person of color that would have came through her classroom, because she would have been like, exactly what I said was true. See, she can't write and she's not even trying. So, I mean, toward the end of the year, me and this teacher's relationship got better, and she ended up actually apologizing for her comments. But not everybody gives you an apology. And so I would say the biggest thing that I learned out of that experience is, who cares what other people think? Some people are going to really like you, and this doesn't matter skin color, age, sex, it just doesn't matter. Some people are just really going to like you. And there's going to be some people that just don't like you, and you may never really know why, and you may have never really done anything to that person, but it's all about experiences. When you have bad experiences with a certain type of person or a certain thing, you don't like to go back to it. It's like little kids and like broccoli. Most kids don't like to eat broccoli because it tastes bad. So when people get bad taste in their mouth, they sometimes react to the next person in that way. So the only thing you can do is try to foster good relationships to help teach that person that not everybody was the person that you had a bad experience with before.
Your mom really had you take the high road on that one. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, my mom was really good at forcing us to do difficult things.
Oh
And
gosh.
honestly, a lot of the time I didn't appreciate it. Now looking at it, I understand what she was teaching us, because not only was she teaching me to be resilient and to think more highly of myself, regardless of what my teacher thought, she was teaching my teacher a lesson as well.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, you taught her a very important lesson.
So all I can say is, I know that we get really wrapped around the axle, especially with social media, about who likes me and who's going to push their thumbs up and how many people are talking about me. And in the grand scheme of that thing, none of that matters. The people close to you matter, and your personal goals are the most important.
Okay, so that leads into kind of our last couple of questions. So I'd like for you to just tell us if you've got any final sort of recommendations or advice that you'd like to give to young listeners who maybe they're inspired by your story to look at into biomedical engineering or maybe another area of engineering. What would be your message to them?
I would say, if I was talking to like a younger me, would be, don't be afraid to try it. You can always say, I don't like that and I never want to do it again. But you don't know that if you don't try. So that's the first thing, is like, just don't be afraid to try things. I mean, you can go, if you're interested in engineering, there's tons of resources online that you can search into. Um, you're more than welcome to reach out to me on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, to ask questions. But there's just so many resources. So just get out and try some things. If you don't like it, you don't ever have to do it again, but try it first. The second piece of it is, engineering sometimes is challenging. And that's part of the reason a lot of us engineers do it, is because we like the challenge of figuring out the puzzle that no one else can figure out. So don't get discouraged. If you become an engineer of any type, you are totally capable of figuring out the brain teaser that nobody wants to figure out or nobody can figure out. So just don't get discouraged. And so that leads me to my last one, is find a support system. That could be a professional society, that could be your family, it could be some combination of the two, it could be an internet group or this podcast. Just find a support group of people with like similar interests, and they're going to help you keep going as well, because you guys are doing the same thing and experiencing the same problems.
Absolutely, that's great. So tell us, what's your Twitter handle?
My Twitter is at Kayla Carter 11.
Perfect. Okay. And then to wrap up, do you want to tell us about your long-term goals and what you're working towards right now?
Sure. So I am in a place of transition. I am taking the road to get my PhD. I am back in school now after many years being in industry. My PhD focus is actually going to be in engineering education. So my goal is to look at how can I recruit and retain all of you wonderful listeners um, in this great field that you can make very, very good money at. In addition to that, my mother had started her own business about 5 or 6 years ago, and she's actually in healthcare IT. And so I have started a division within that business to do medical device consulting because that is what I'm good at and that's what I know. So there will be a lot of information flooding, I'm sure, my Twitter with blogs about medical device development and being young in the industry and how to survive it. So definitely check that out. But I would say you never know what roads may lead you. I mean, industry has taught me a lot, and now I'm able to work for myself and go get my graduate degree. So, and I've known people that have taken similar paths and started, major companies. So, just keep your options open. You never know.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Kayla. You gave us a lot of great information today, and I learned a lot about the biomedical engineering field that I didn't know. So thank you so much for taking the time and sharing all of this with us.
Thank you for having me.
Kayla is totally awesome, right? Not only has she had a success in engineering design in a competitive market, but she's now on her way to a PhD while working as an entrepreneur. What an amazing woman. You can find this episode's show notes at STEMxm.com/episode 8. That's STEMxm.com/episode and then the number 8. Before we go, I also wanted to mention that I made an assumption about Kayla's race, and I asked her about this after the call because I realized that she might identify differently. So I'd just like to quickly read her response. She wrote, quote, "Thank you for asking. I identify as multiracial. I am Caucasian, African American, and Native American from the Lenape tribe." I know that is a mouthful. My involvement in professional groups includes NSBE and the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. End quote. So I just wanted to let you know I'll have links for both the National Society of Black Engineers and the American Indian Science and Engineering Society in the show notes. Also, I'll do a better job and keep better consciousness about discussing this with our STEMxm guests in advance. All right, thank you again for listening to STEMxm. If you'd like to help the show out, you can head over to STEMxm.com/partner, where you can find links to share STEMxm on your social media. And sharing really is caring because it helps other folks find out about the STEM career resources that we develop here on the podcast. Thanks again. I appreciate you so much. And remember, whatever your goal is in STEM, you can achieve it. We'll see you on the flip side in episode 9.
This has been an episode of the STEMxm podcast. Thank you for listening. We would really love if you could pop over to iTunes and give us an honest, positive rating. It helps more listeners find us to learn about STEM careers. Thanks again, cheers, and we'll catch you on the next episode.